And now we've got Nigel Farage about to speak to us. And normally, Nigel gives way to Jacob and GB News, but it's the other way today. I have to say, Nigel has turned out to be, he's an excellent media presenter and interviewer. He's very fair, don't you find? On GB News, you know what he thinks, which you do with Nigel, but he's an excellent interviewer. I knew him, and I know him as you know him, as the hero of Brexit. We would not be here in a freer country outside the European Union without the work and conviction and strength that Nigel put in. It's a privilege for me to witness that firsthand. And it was great to see him at the Conservative Party conference, actually, on a number of occasions, and he was very warmly received. But, of course, he is Honorary President of Reform, and the TFA, the Freedom Association, as I said earlier, is entirely apolitical. So please will you welcome Nigel Farage.
Good afternoon, everybody. David, Mr. Chairman, could not have been more wrong in his introduction. He said that I give way to Jacob Rees-Mogg every evening. I've never given way to anybody in my entire life. It's a very minor correction. I couldn't help musing on the way over here in the last few minutes about the Freedom Association and where it started and why it started. For those that don't know, it was, of course, the famous McWhirter twins. They of the Guinness Book of Records. They of record breakers in the 1970s on television for those of us of a certain generation. And, of course, the president was Viscount de Lisle, VC, and these were all what I would call proper people. It was a tragedy, of course, that Ross was murdered by the IRA. But Ross, his twin brother, continued throughout those years. And it was my great privilege in the 1990s, through coming to Freedom Association events, to meet Ross, who, for some reason, goodness knows why, seemed to believe in me. As a young 34-year-old that I was taller, thinner, darker haired. I was very shy back in those days. No, that bit's not true. And Ross, in memory of Ross and everything that Norris had ever fought for, he came with me around village halls and town halls all around southern England in that 1999 European election campaign where I first got elected. And I thought about the reasons this organisation was formed and the huge historic legal victory it won against the closed shop. Younger people here won't remember what that was, but basically the Freedom Association was about the freedom of the individual to make their own decisions, to not be coerced. And I muse coming over here what Norris and indeed Ross and Viscount de Lisle would have made of modern Britain. 13 years into what is laughably called a Conservative government, we have seen the scale, the reach, the extent of government move into our lives in a way we could never have comprehended, even back in 2010. Just try and drive a motor car. If you've been foolish enough to pay your tax and insurance, and you're legally driving down the embankment at 2:30 in the morning at 23 miles an hour, you'll get a fine. But of course, if you've stolen the car, then nothing whatsoever will ever happen to you. And this is the extraordinary thing about this surveillance society. We're told all of these cameras, all of these checks, that all of it, provided you're innocent of any crime, won't affect you. And the truth is, it's the law-abiding Brits that are now beginning to pick up the tab on the cost for all of this, whilst those that live in rank criminality, be it through shoplifting, taking driving away, get away with everything. We've got our society the wrong way round. We're punishing the good people and not punishing the bad people. And I think it's all set to get worse, because this Prime Minister, do you remember his name? He's the chap that wants to ban cigarettes for anybody born after 2009. That was the centrepiece of his conference speech. And I'm sure it was a top priority for almost all of you in this room. That and fiddling with A-levels, whilst a Class A drugs epidemic sweeps through the youth of our nation. But he is working on, and they are currently employing and have employed people to work on the rollout of a central bank digital currency in this country to begin its trial phase in 2030. Now, it is not easy for any organisation to fight against the flowing tide. And the flowing tide of the big state, of course, uses health, safety. These are all the I nearly forgot. Saving the planet. I nearly forgot. I mean, this is so terribly important. Net zero is so terribly important. The fact the rest of the world this year will burn 8 billion tonnes of coal, the fact that China will build between 70 and 80 new gigantic coal-fired power stations, none of that seems to be understood by the consensus that exists in Westminster amongst nearly all of within all of our existing political parties. No one seems to care about any of that. But the advent of a central bank digital currency, I want the Freedom Association to think about. Because my advice to you today is to pick this up as something that you can fight for and you can champion. The ultimate control of people's lives is control of their money. I'm sorry to interrupt you, I really am. It must be very important, mustn't it? That is the ultimate control over your lives. And it isn't just about controlling what money comes into your bank account. No, far more important is controlling what you choose to spend your money on. And you know what? The banks. Now, I didn't realise in 2013, when I stood up in the European Parliament to give one of my ever helpful, constructive contributions to debate in that chamber. It's the only irony of Brexit is that I sort of quite miss being there, really. I mean, gosh, having a crack at von der Leyen would have been so much fun, wouldn't it? Trouble with Juncker was, even though we disagreed on everything, I actually quite liked him. He's the only person I've ever met that made me think I hadn't got a drink problem, you see. That was the reason. I mean, after lunch, he wasn't there, you know. I was in control, and I missed some of that. But I said in 2013 in the European Parliament that I fear that modern Western society is being overtaken by an unholy triumvirate of big government, big business, and big banks. Little did I know that those that ran the NatWest Group and Coots in particular were taking this speech as government has taken Orwell's 1984 and intended to put it into literal interpretation. Cancel culture in all of its forms is obnoxious. And I think all of us in this room are frankly big enough and ugly enough to understand what the limits of free speech are. We should be free to say things that offend other people. But we should not be free to say things that are insightful against other people. And you know something? There's nothing new about this. This is the way it's been for centuries. In fact, actually for a couple of thousand years. Free speech is about the ability to express an opinion. And most of us in this room grew up in a society that had been shaped by two horrible world wars, where people understood the fact that others had different points of view. And you might have argued vigorously against each other, but the next day it was kind of all forgotten. Because what was the blooming point of two world wars and that sacrifice if we didn't have the rights of free speech and the right to agree to disagree, but to do so within a certain reasonable set of parameters? But the new Marxist agenda that has permeated throughout our society, of course, says, not only do I disagree with you, I disagree with your right to be able to say this. And that is actually at the heart of what cancel culture is. And we can blame the Marxists, we can blame those that want to destroy our society, but there is a truth here that I don't think is being acknowledged. Oh, we see conservative Home Secretaries, whether it's my dancing partner, Priti Patel, or whether it's Suella, and they say these things on the stage and we think, well, yes, we agree with them. The problem is their parties never actually do anything about it. Conservative cowardice is the biggest cause of cancel culture in our country today. The fact that so-called liberals, and we're very pleased to see our former Liberal Democrat member of Parliament, I mean, the great thing about this guy, you know, who, I mean, they think I'm an oddball, goodness me. But he's a liberal in the old-fashioned sense of the word. He believes in small state. He believes in individual freedom, rights, enterprise, and free speech. And the other, in parallel with what's happened with the cowardice of conservatism, is that the liberals have now become profoundly illiberal in almost every single way. So we have to fight back against all of this. Now, my own battle on this, and of course, I've always been an advocate for free speech, and some would argue that I might just once or twice, in slightly naughtier moments, have pushed the edges of some of these debates, although as years have gone by, nearly all of it has proved to be correct and to be true. But I do profoundly believe that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. And I genuinely do believe in that. I think my granny was right about that, and we must fight to get back to that kind of society. It isn't going to happen with the current political setup. But my own direct, and of course I understood, even 25 years ago, I was being cancelled. You know, speaking events organised at Reigate Grammar School, and suddenly the mob, you know, send letters and emails and phone calls, and you get cancelled. I knew about cancel culture before any of you had even heard of the word. So I understand what this oppression, suppression is like. But I guess my finest hour in fighting cancel culture came with a phone call in April of last year from some nondescript banker. You see, I pronounced that correctly. To tell me that my accounts were to be closed at Coutts. After 43 years of banking with the group, all of my personal banking, my business banking in the city and since had all been with that group. I'd never defaulted. I'd always repaid. I kept large positive cash balances, perhaps stupidly. And I'd been transferred from NatWest to Coutts for whatever reason, chiefly because I was earning money in, as Jonathan would know, another currency, one that mercifully we didn't join. Thank God. And I was to be cancelled. And I found myself not knowing what to do. So I thought, well, the easy way to deal with this is to find a quick, swift, easy solution. And I went around and was rejected by no fewer than 10 other banks. 10 other banks, household names, some of them, private banks, others, after scores of hours of filling in ghastly forms, having meetings, refused to have my business. I literally felt that I was on the point of being driven out of the country. This is cancel culture in its ultimate form, because you cannot live or exist or survive in a modern society without a bank account. It is literally impossible to pay the gas bill, if you can afford it, without having a bank account. And I mused on this, and I mused on, should I go public? Was it time that I came out to the world? And I decided that I would come out and tell the world what had happened to me, and the fact that no explanation had been given whatsoever for what had happened to me personally and in terms of my business. And to my astonishment, the fact that I'd put my head over the parapet, as perhaps I'd done previously politically, meant that other people chose to stand up and come out. And we learned that 1 million people in Britain, 1 million people and businesses in Britain over the course of the last few years have been debanked, have been closed down. It is the ultimate form of cancel culture. And I felt proud of what I was doing, because I wasn't just standing up and fighting for me, I was standing up fighting for the rights of so many other people who've had their lives impinged upon and actually impaired by this whole process. What I've also learned is that already the banks are limiting what you can spend your legally earned money on. Some look at me with incredulity. I had a 19-year-old kid write to me, university student working in a bar, working behind a bar, fine profession. And he said he's taking 50 quid a month from his NatWest account and investing it in crypto coins. Now, he asked me what I thought. I said, look, you'll probably do your conkers on most of them, but you never know. One of them, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, one of them might go to the moon, but it's his free choice. You know, part of a free society is our free choice how we spend our money. He's been told by NatWest he may no longer transfer £50 a month to a firm called Coinbase, despite the fact they're FCA registered. And this is now happening across the banks. The banks are saying, you may not put your legally earned money into cryptocurrency. Take this a step further to a central bank digital currency, where every single transaction that you make or register in our new, wonderful, cashless society can be monitored by government. Oh, Mr. Smith, you've just booked a flight to Marbella. I'm very sorry, but your carbon allowance for the year has been used up. This is not fantastical. This is not some extreme fantasy. This is what many of those in big government want to do. Now, I think for all of us that believe in freedom, in individual liberty, and in having a state that is as big as it needs to be, whilst being as small as it should be, if you understand the point that I'm making, I don't think any of us here believe there shouldn't be a safety net for those in our community that are unfortunate, are disabled, are elderly. I don't think any of us in this room believe that should not be the case. But we now have a society, we now have a community that is being funded to an extent by government where we're actually damaging the very work ethic that leads to profits, that lead to taxes, that lead to us being able to afford to have these things. And I don't think reversing any of this is going to be easy. But I do think for the Freedom Association and for everything it's embodied and valued, ever since those days of Viscount de Lisle and the McWhirter brothers, the battle against the state monitoring everything you earn and everything you can spend is a very big and very noble battle. And it begins, folks, in 2030. It is not that far away. And I recommend to you, as an organisation, that you do it. Politically, I'm often asked questions about politics and where it's all going to go. And whilst the Freedom Association is non-party political, I need to make one or two predictions, I think, this evening. I was at a cocktail party last week. I mean, my life is bloody murder at times. It was really hard going, I've got to tell you. Anyway, it was one of Lord Ashcroft's book launches, and there was a very earnest, sincere young woman from Politico. Isn't it funny how earnest everybody is these days? No one's got a sense of humour anymore. And she asked about my visit to the Conservative Party conference at Manchester, which I've got to tell you was really rather fun. Well, I didn't know what was going to happen. But I just sort of, turned up and walked up the steps very modestly like I do. And suddenly crowds of people. So I thought, we'll have a bit of this. And I realised that the Tory party membership were a lost tribe. Desperate to believe in something. Desperate to believe in somebody. Nothing that they've got, right at this moment in time. Because it's kind of gone, hasn't it? Anyway, this very earnest woman says to me, what do you think your future political aspirations will be? And I said, well, I'd be very surprised if I wasn't leader of the Conservative Party by 2026. And of course, she rings me up the next morning. Oh, Mr. Farage, you said last night at the cocktail party that you'd been there. And I said, my love, it was a drinks party. I mean, no one's ever taken me seriously after 9 p.m. for the whole of my life. I said, it's a joke. But of course, it's all published, But I will say this. I think the next general election, and forgive me for saying this on your platform, it's nothing to do with the Freedom Association, my personal comment. The Conservative Party will lose the next general election. The Conservative Party deserve to lose the next general election. And the Conservative Party need to lose the next general election. I had John Redwood on the show, on the GB News show that I do the other week. And I said, John, so you disagree with the government on tax? You disagree with the government on immigration? You disagree with the government on business entrepreneurship? You disagree with the government on the NHS management? I said, John, there's nothing you agree with the government on, is there? He said, no. I said, so why should we vote Conservative at the next election? Because Labour would be worse. I said, John, I am sick to the back teeth of the negativity of that argument. Unless you can give me something that I can vote for, I will not do so. And this is where we are. This is where we are. Our two dominant parties under our electoral system are both telling us, please vote for us, because the other lot will be worse. Don't you think that a once great country deserves, at some point in the next few years, something rather better than that? So Starmer's going to win. Starmer's going to win. Yes, they might lose one or two councillors in the Hamas wards of London. It's not even funny, really, is it? But it's just the way it is. How horrifying. Can you imagine? There's the bloke on a mic in central London on last Saturday saying a curse upon the Jews. A curse upon the Jews. But the Metropolitan Police decide they won't act. Can you imagine? If any of you went out and said a curse against the West Indians, I mean, you'd be banged up before you could say Jack Robinson. These are the double standards, sadly, by which we're living. Starmer will win, and actually John's right. They probably will be even worse than the current Conservative Party. But whether you vote Conservative or Labour or Liberal Democrat in England, frankly, it makes almost no difference. These are all social democrat parties. They are all big state parties. They are all high tax parties. They are all totally relaxed about the astonishing demographic changes that are going on within our country, as evidenced by 100,000 people out on the streets of London last Saturday afternoon. Immigration only works if it's at levels that are sustainable. The immigration debate isn't about race, it's about culture. It's about culture. And when we see those... But I'm always to conclude the perpetual optimist. Hey, having been with UKIP 25 years, you had to be pretty optimistic about life. And I believe that social pendulums swing one way and swing back the other. Look at what happened in Scotland. Queen Nicola, who passed her driving test yesterday. Took her a bit of time. Queen Nicola was in power, looked to be utterly impregnable in her position, introduces a piece of trans rights law that most people thought was crazy, but very few in Scotland dared to publicly oppose. She was all omnipotent, all powerful. And then what happened? A double rapist turned up in court, put on a wig, said he was a bird, got convicted, sent to a women's prison, and Scotland said no, and the pendulum swung back overnight. And pendulums do swing back overnight. In 1658, at the height of the Cromwellian terror, you could be imprisoned. They would knock your door down. And if there were too many celebratory, holly rings above your mantelpiece, you could be imprisoned for over-celebrating Christmas. And by 1680, we'd sunk to Hogarth's gin lane. A pendulum that swung in 22 years in the most astonishing way. And what we learn from Scotland is the current madness that we see on so many things that frustrate nearly everyone in this room. These pendulums can swing back. But generally what they need is leadership. In the short term, there is no great solution to where we are. But I believe that after the Conservative Party gets crushed at the next general election, there's going to be a radical rethink of what politics is actually for. Because if the choice, frankly, and I guess this is a very modern analogy, is between two cross-dressing parties. It's all very fashionable, I'm told. I wouldn't know myself. But if the choice is between two cross-dressing parties with no fundamental principle or ideology between them, then the time comes for something new. The time comes for a politics about renewal, a politics about reform and change. And I actually think, folks, after next year's election will be the opportunity when we need to be part, and you need to be part, of reforming and reshaping a new political philosophy. It's coming. So as bad as it looks, as dark as it looks, don't get too down. We have the history of humankind behind us. We have the understanding when things go too far in one direction, they always come back towards common sense. Remember, there is still a majority of common sense out there in this country. But what people need is leadership. They need to be inspired. And if I can do anything in my own little modest way after the next election to help us get to that point, I will happily and gladly do so. And to you as an organisation with your half a century in fighting for these great principles, keep going. Thank you.